I am Gene Chambers, your videographer, and I represent Atkinson Baker, Inc. in Glendale, California. I am not financially interested in this action, nor am I a relative or employee of any attorney or any other parties. The date is August 11th, 2009. The time is 9:02 a.m. This deposition is taking place at Asbury and Sims, 100 Peabody Place, Suite 900, Memphis, Tennessee, 38103. This is case number 4:09-CB-008BSM, entitled Terry Hobbs versus Natalie Pastor, individually, and Natalie Pasdar, Emily Robinson, and Martha Siddell, doing business as Dixie Chicks. The opponent is Mr. Terry Hobbs. This deposition is being taken on behalf of the defendants. The court reporter is Ms. Danette Crouch from Blue City Reporting. Counsel, will you please introduce yourselves?
DeLeslie Davis and Dan Davison for defendant Natalie Pasdar.
Bob Wellenberger for the Dixie Chicks.
Kobe Island and Ted Thomas for the plaintiff Terry Hobbs.
Sir, would you raise your hand, please? Do you swear or affirm that the testimony you're about to give will be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?
I do.
Mr. Hobbs, you remember that I'm DeLeslie Davis and I'm an attorney representing Natalie Pasdar in this case, correct?
Correct.
And you understand that this is just a continuation of the last day of the deposition that we took of you. You're still under oath, and the testimony you're giving is still just the same as if you were sitting in a courtroom.
Yes, ma'am.
And all the agreements we had and instructions about if you don't understand one of my questions, you'll let me know. If you need to take a break, you'll let me know. Those are still in effect. Is that okay?
That's okay.
Mr. Hobbs, you appeared on the Maury Povich show in August of 1994, correct?
I'm not sure of the date, but we did in Moore's show, yes.
Do you remember that it was in 1994, about a year after the murders?
Roughly so.
Let me show you what I've marked as deposition exhibit number 20, which is an article entitled Retrial Sought in 94 Slayings by Kathy Fry, May 31st of 2008. I think there was some discussion of this in your last deposition, but I just wanted to make sure that that's a true and correct copy of an article in which you gave some quotes. Does that sound right?
I'm not sure if I give quotes on this or not.
Let me clarify then. I think in your last deposition you mentioned that you had contacted Kathy Fry in an attempt to talk to her about getting the truth out there about the West Memphis Three. Does that sound familiar?
Out of Little Rock.
I'm sorry?
Miss Fry out of Little Rock?
Yes.
Remember that?
And I think if you look at Exhibit 20, you can see that this article was written by Kathy Fry.
Okay.
Does that sound familiar?
That looks familiar.
I believe you met with her around May of 2008 at a barbecue restaurant.
Here in Memphis.
In Memphis, correct? And I've read through that article, which is titled Retrial Sought, and I've read through some of the notations in your journal, and I think I understand what you were testifying to in your last deposition about the reasons that you went to the press on a number of occasions, and I want to make sure that I'm right about that, okay?
All righty.
When you say that you wanted to get the truth out, there was a lot of conversation through the years about the West Memphis Three deserving a new trial, correct?
There has been.
And for years there's been discussion about them getting the raw end of the deal in their trials, correct?
There has been.
And when you talked about wanting to get the truth out, one of the things you were trying to accomplish in talking to the press was to make it clear that you believed that the West Memphis police and the prosecutors had done a good job in investigating and prosecuting the true killers in the murders, correct?
Correct.
And that the West Memphis Three belonged in prison.
Correct.
And that there was no need for further investigation or further appeals of their convictions. The authorities had the right guys.
In my opinion, they do.
And you wanted the press and the public and people that were wondering about whether the West Memphis Three deserved a new trial to understand that that was your opinion on the matter, correct?
Correct.
And when you agreed to sell your life story to Dimension Films and to sit down with the Dimension Films filmmakers and talk about the murders and allow Dimension Films to use your life story and the life story of Stevie in a potential motion picture, you also were wanting to make sure that that truth that we just discussed got out to the public and to the authorities, correct?
Probably so.
And that if there was going to be a movie made about the West Memphis Three and whether they were wrongfully convicted, you certainly wanted your position on the matter to be clear, and that was that the authorities had tried and prosecuted the killers, correct?
Correct.
And that they should stay in jail and that there was no further need for investigation of anybody, correct?
Correct.
And later then, to the extent that anybody was concerned about whether you were involved in the murders and whether there needed to be any investigation of you, you wanted the truth out there that you were not involved in the murders, correct?
Correct.
And that there didn't need to be any investigation of you, correct?
Correct.
You have not done any research to determine what specific evidence the Damian Eccles defense team will present at a hearing on the habeas corpus filing, have you?
Probably not.
You haven't reviewed the filing that Damian Eccles made to try to get a new trial or get released, have you?
I don't keep up with it like that.
And I appreciate that, and just to make sure that we're clear, you haven't actually looked at the documents he filed with regard to habeas, have you?
No.
And you haven't kept up, as you say, with regard to what specific evidence he plans to present at the federal hearing?
Correct.
We had talked earlier about Deposition Exhibit number 8, and I've put in front of you all the deposition exhibits we had at your last deposition, so if for any reason you need to refer to any of those, please do. But Deposition Exhibit number 8 was the Dimension Films contract that you signed regarding your life story and Stevie's life story. Do you recall that contract?
We did do one with them.
And to clarify, I may have misspoken, that the Deposition Exhibit number 8 is not actually a signed copy of that contract.
Correct.
Do you have a signed copy of that contract?
Probably somewhere.
Just don't know where.
Right.
Is it your best recollection that the only thing wrong with Deposition Exhibit number 8, the unsigned contract, if you were to compare it to the actual signed contract, is that amount of payment? That's the only difference.
I'm not sure. I'd have to read them both, compare them.
Would you do that for me? Would you agree to go back and look for the signed version of that contract?
I'm not sure if I could even find it.
If Ross Sampson has a copy of the signed version of the Dimension Films contract, would it be okay with you if he produced it to us?
Sure.
A chronology is a description of events and when they occurred. Isn't that correct?
Okay.
Do you agree with that? I'm sorry, I spoke
I
up.
do. I do.
And based on your understanding, and I know you're not an expert in DNA and forensic testing, but you do have an understanding that those tests are expensive, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
We've talked a lot about events that occurred in 2007. I want to pick a time frame, December 31st of 2006. I want to talk about the time frame just real briefly from the date of the murders, May 5th of 1993, to December 31st of 2006. Are you with me on that time frame?
I am.
During that time, no one ever accused you, no one in the press ever accused you of being involved in any way in the murders. Is that correct?
Not to my knowledge.
And other than a few comments that we've discussed regarding Pam Hobbs' family, are there any other persons from the date of the murders to December 31st of 2006 that you know considered that it was possible that you were involved in the murders?
Not that I'm aware of.
When you met with the West Memphis 3 investigators and the criminal profiler, what did they tell you about who they were?
What did they tell me? Ron Lax, defense investigator for the West Memphis 3.
So he did tell you at least that he was affiliated with and working for the West Memphis 3.
Correct.
And did Rachel Geiser and John Douglas also tell you that they were affiliated with and working with and for the West Memphis 3?
I believe they do.
And you understood that Ron Lax and Rachel Geiser and John Douglas were working to help the West Memphis 3 either, it's kind of back to what we were talking about before, get a new trial or get out of prison, correct?
That's to my understanding.
And you understood that what they were doing in their attempts to either help the West Memphis 3 get a new trial or get out of prison was trying to gather evidence that would be favorable to the West Memphis 3.
I do.
And at no time did Ron Lax, Rachel Geiser, or John Douglas ever tell you that your communications with them were confidential, correct?
I had asked him if I am being recorded or videoed, and I was told no.
But they never told you that the discussions you were having with them were confidential and would not be disclosed to anyone, did they?
I don't believe they did.
And it seems to me, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it seems to me that one of the reasons you were also meeting with the West Memphis 3 investigators, Ron Lax, Rachel Geiser, John Douglas, was also part of this mission to get the truth out.
Object to the characterization of his mission to get the truth out.
In other words,
Hear all of that.
Object to the characterization of his mission to get the truth out.
in other words, you wanted the West Memphis 3 investigators to understand in the same way that you had wanted the public and the authorities to understand that you believed, and I'll just break it down, that the West Memphis police had done a good job in catching the killers, correct?
They did.
And you wanted the West Memphis 3 investigators to know that as well, correct?
Right.
And you wanted the West Memphis 3 investigators to know that you felt like the prosecutors had done a good job in getting an appropriate conviction of the killers when they convicted the West Memphis 3, correct?
Correct.
And that to the extent you could impart to those West Memphis 3 investigators that there was no need for further investigation, you wanted to do that, correct?
Well, I did, and there's also something else you're overlooking. I mentioned this before to someone, I wanted to go down and see what kind of people that are trying to get some killers out of prison.
And that's one of the reasons, quite frankly, that I'm following up on this line of question. I got your transcript back to the first day of the deposition. Did you have an opportunity to look at that?
No.
Okay. And in reading that, I saw that comment where you said you wondered what kind of people would try to get killers out of prison. And that's one of the reasons I'm following up.
The rules don't contemplate you going back through a transcript after 7 hours and then coming back in here and pounding them.
Well, I'm not trying to pound him.
What we need to do is move to new topics. What we don't need to do is go to the transcript and use extra time. You know, we want to get this thing done today.
I understand that, Mr. Thomas, and I'm trying to do that. But in follow-up to that, I'm trying to understand your testimony.
You've made 3 or 4 references to the previous transcript.
And let me just finish this line of questioning. And that is to say that in going down and meeting with the West Memphis 3 investigators to see what kind of people would want to get killers out of prison, you wanted to take that opportunity to inform the West Memphis 3 investigators that the right guys were in prison and there was no need for further investigation, correct?
At the time, yes. Little to no that I was under their investigation.
And I'll object to everything, but at the time, yes, as being non-responsive. Did you tell John Mark Byers about the DNA evidence when Ron Lax told you about your DNA evidence?
I'm not sure.
Do you have any recollection of calling Mr. Byers and informing him of that DNA evidence sometime in May or June of 2007?
I don't recollect that.
Is it possible that you did?
It could be. I'm not sure.
If Mr. Byers said that you called him and told him about the DNA evidence before he had heard about the Hobbs DNA evidence from any other source, would you agree that that's probably likely what you did?
Objection like foundation. This calls for speculation.
You can answer.
I wouldn't believe anything John Mark Byers said.
Is it fair to say that you and John Mark Byers were friends for a time?
I tried to be.
What period of time was it that you and Mr. Byers actually had a good relationship?
I don't think we ever had a good relationship.
What was the time period that you were trying to be friends with Mr. Byers?
During and after the trials,
And how long after the trials?
well, we went our separate ways. And I would run across him or call him every once in a while.
Can you tell me a time period that your relationship with Mr. Byers went south?
Probably when I found out that he had been recording me, and not to my knowledge.
And when was that?
I'm not sure,
Is it 2007, 2008?
roughly.
Can you narrow it down to one of those years?
Not really.
Yep. Mr. Hobbs, I'm going to have to go into some material now that may be sensitive. And I want you to know that I'm not trying to make you uncomfortable or embarrass you. It's just the nature of this case in which certain sensitive events occurred in 1993, and also the fact that you've placed your reputation in issue by bringing this lawsuit. So please understand as I ask you some of these questions that I'm not trying to upset you. Let me show you what's been marked as Deposition Exhibit number 21. And that is an affidavit prepared by Sharon Nelson, who is a former girlfriend of yours, I believe, according to your past testimony. You have seen this document before, correct?
We did this last time.
Well, you mentioned overall that you thought it was a bunch of garbage last time, but is this the document, Deposition Exhibit number 21, is the document you were referring to as a bunch of garbage?
Part of it is, yes, ma'am.
What is the other bunch of garbage that you're referring to with regard to Ms. Nelson?
The part that she said that I found the boys first, and anything she said about that is a lie.
Let me just read this real quickly then. In paragraph 5, I recall a few times that Terry did talk about Stevie when Terry and I were alone together. Terry told me he discovered the bodies of the boys the night they were killed. He said that the bodies were buried underwater. Terry told me that they were dead when he found the bodies. Terry said that he saw some bites and there were some cut-like marks. He told me those bodies were nothing I would ever want to see when I'd asked what they looked like when he found them. Terry told me he found the bodies before he picked up Pam, his ex-wife, from her job that night. Terry said he waited to tell her and the police until it was time for Pam to get off work. Are those statements by Ms. Nelson true?
No, ma'am.
Specifically, did you find the bodies of the 3 little boys prior to picking Pam up from work?
No, I did not.
Did you ever tell Sharon Nelson that you found the bodies of the boys prior to picking them up from work?
Not one time.
Do you have any explanation for, well, let me back up. Are you saying that Sharon Nelson is lying in her affidavit?
Exactly.
Do you have any explanation for why Sharon Nelson would lie about something that serious in her affidavit?
Her 15 minutes of fame.
Any other explanation for why Ms. Nelson would lie about something so important other than that she wanted to be famous for a few minutes?
No, I have no explanation for that.
I'm going to show you what I'm marking as Deposition Exhibit number 22. and I'll direct your attention to page 7 of this document. I'll represent to you that this is a copy of the testimony of Regina Meek at the trial of Damian Eccles and James Baldwin. Do you recall in your interview by the West Memphis Police Department that you told the West Memphis Police that you had searched the woods with Lieutenant Regina Meek from the West Memphis Police Department?
I don't recall that.
As you sit here today, do you recall whether you searched the wooded area with Lieutenant Regina Meek?
Miss Regina Meeks came out to the wooded area. We followed her over there. She got out her car. She walked down in the woods just a few minutes, and she come back. It was hot, muggy, full of mosquitoes, and that was her reason that she told us. And it was shift change.
If Ms. Meek testifies, as she did in deposition exhibit number 22, that she was out of her car for 3 to 4 minutes and did not cross the pipe bridge into the woods, would you disagree with that testimony?
No, I wouldn't disagree.
And would you consider, based on your recollection of events and your consideration of Lieutenant Meek's testimony that you have in front of you, would you consider that to be searching the woods with Lieutenant Meek, her getting out of the car for 3 or 4 minutes and walking to the pipe bridge?
No, because it was a 3-acre area.
Let me mark as deposition exhibit number 23 the testimony of Dana Moore. This is trial testimony. In your journals and in your Dimension Films interview, and I think in a few other places, you have indicated that you were with Dana Moore and Mark Byers between 6 p.m. and 6:30 on May 5th of 1993, and that the three of you guys were discussing where the kids were and starting a search and calling the police officers. Do you recall that you have previously made those statements?
I met Miss Moore in her front yard.
Do you recall that you, on numerous occasions, said that that meeting in the front yard with Ms. Moore and Mr. Byers occurred around 6 or 6:30 p.m. on May 5th of 1993?
I don't want to put a time on it, but we did have the meeting in the front yard.
Well, and I understand you're not putting a time on it today. My question is a little more specific. Do you recall that on past occasions you have said that that meeting in the front yard with Ms. Moore and Mr. Byers occurred around 6 or 6:30 p.m. on May 5th of 1993?
No, ma'am.
You just have no recollection of that as you sit here today?
Well, I don't know the time.
Let me direct your attention to the second page of the Dana Moore testimony. Beginning about halfway down the page, Mr. Fogelman asks Ms. Moore, "Later, did you see him," meaning her son Michael Moore, "with somebody else besides Steve Branch?" Answer, "Yes, sir, Chris Byers." Question, "Where did you see them at that time?" Answer, "Going north on 14th Street. Question, "Were they walking?" Or answer, "They were riding their bikes." Question, "How many bikes were there?" Answer, "There was 2 bikes." And then down towards the end, about 4 lines up, question, "What time of the day was it?" Answer, 6 o'clock. Did I read that correctly?
That's what, correct?
Ms. Moore testified that she saw the boys at 6 p.m. on May 5th of 1993. Does that refresh your recollection about whether or not the meeting you had in Ms. Moore's front yard with Mr. Byers and Ms. Moore discussing the missing boys could have occurred substantially later than 6 p.m.?
No, I don't.
Is it possible that on the occasions you stated that you met with Ms. Moore and Mr. Byers at 6 p.m. or 6:30, you were mistaken?
I'm not sure of the time. I know we had the meeting.
Is it possible that you were mistaken in past accounts by you of what happened on May 5th, 1993, when you say that meeting occurred at 6 p.m. or 6:30 p.m.?
I'm not sure about the time.
And I'll object to that answer as being non-responsive. My specific question is it possible, Mr. Hobbs, in past versions or past accounts of those events, that you were mistaken when you said you met with Ms. Moore and Mr. Byers at 6 p.m. or 6:30 on May 5th of 1993?
It's possible.
Is it possible that your meeting with Ms. Moore and Mr. Byers did not occur until approximately 8 or 8:30 p.m.?
I guess it's possible.
You don't have any reason to believe that Ms. Moore is lying in her deposition testimony, do you?
No.
Let me show you what I'm marking as deposition exhibit number 24, which is a declaration of John Mark Byers. I'll give you a moment to look at that. Let me direct your attention to paragraph 17. Mr. Byers states, "In fact, I met Hobbs at my house at approximately 8:20 or 8:30 p.m. I know it was 8:20 or 8:30 p.m. or so because, number one, Dana Moore had last seen the boys riding their bikes around 6 p.m., and two, I called the police to report Christopher missing around 8:08 p.m. Simply put, I did not and Dana Moore did not even think the boys were missing at 6 p.m. or 6:30 p.m. Did I read that entry correctly, Mr. Hobbs?
You did.
I'm sorry?
You did.
And does that additional testimony from Mr. Byers, in conjunction with what we've just read from Ms. Moore, suggest to you that the time that you met Ms. Moore and Ms. Byers in the front yard of her house on May 5th of 1993 was not around 6 or 6:30 p.m., but was rather around 8 or 8:30 p.m.?
Okay, sounds good.
Does that sound correct?
I don't know about correct.
Objection, lack of foundation, ask and answer. He said what he has to say about this at least 20 times.
Let me direct your attention to paragraph 26 in Mr. Byers' declaration. I think it's the last paragraph. I'm going to read it. On one occasion, I asked Hobbs, what if those three, the West Memphis three, didn't do it? What happened if it was an accident? Of course, it is preposterous to think that 3 8-year-old boys could be killed in the way they were and it was an accident. Hobbs responded, you are right. It could have been an accident, and that would be like a drunk driver. That person would not be a monster. And then Mr. Byers goes on and talks about his feelings about what you said. Is that a true and accurate account of a conversation you had with Mr. Byers?
No, I don't recall this one.
Is it possible that that conversation occurred?
No.
Are you accusing Mr. Byers of lying in paragraph 26 when he describes this conversation with you?
I'm saying I don't believe that statement.
I understand that. Mr. Byers has sworn that that conversation occurred, and I'm asking you if it's your position that Mr. Byers is lying in this declaration in paragraph 26.
Yes, ma'am.
Can you think of any explanation why Mr. Byers would lie about having that conversation with you?
No, you had to ask him.
Let me show you what I'm going to mark as deposition exhibit number 25, which is a declaration from Pam Hobbs, your ex-wife. let me direct your attention to paragraph 40 in that declaration.